Welcome, traveler. Tonight we wander through places where the walls remember, where the air is heavy with the voices of the past, and where the silence of abandoned rooms hides stories that were never meant to be forgotten. You are about to hear 3 creepy old house stories true, tales of sorrow, of whispers that never faded, and of homes that refused to let go of those who once lived within. So dim the lights, close your eyes if you wish, and let us step together into the shadows of history. Our first story begins with a house left to the weeds, its windows dark, its doors long sealed. But even the dust could not hide what happened there. This is the tale of the Holloway House. Story 1. Creepy old house stories. True, the Holloway Manor. There are houses. And then there are places that live on long after their walls should have collapsed, their windows should have shattered, their roofs should have caved in. Houses that refuse to be forgotten. Tonight, I will tell you a story that has been told in hushed voices for over a century. A story that begins in a small, forgotten town and lingers still in the quiet breath of the forest. This is not fiction. This is not imagination. It is one of those rare, creepy old house stories, true, carried down through records, eyewitnesses, and locals who still will not go near the place after dark. The story of Holloway Manor. In the year 1889, the Hollow family moved into a grand estate in the rolling countryside of Pennsylvania. The house was enormous for its time, 3 stories tall, with wide verandas, ornate gables, and tall windows that caught the light in a way that made it gleam like a jewel among the trees. The Hollow family was wealthy, but their money came from shadowed beginnings. Samuel Hollow, the patriarch, had made his fortune in the coal industry. His wife, Eleanor, was known for her delicate beauty and her cold, watchful eyes. They had 2 children, Thomas, a boy of 12, and Clara, a quiet, pale girl of 8. The family moved into the manor in late autumn. By winter, whispers had already begun in the nearby town. The servants hired to keep the home spoke of strange events. Cold drafts that swept through the hallways even when fires blazed in the hearths, doors that refused to stay locked. The sound of footsteps pacing the attic, though no one was ever found there. One maid lasted only a week. She claimed she had woken in the night to see a woman in gray standing at the foot of her bed. When she lit her candle, the woman was gone. But on the wooden floor, a set of wet footprints remained, leading out of her room and disappearing into the hallway. The Hollow family dismissed these tales as foolishness. But the servants kept leaving one by one until only a handful remained. The winter of illness in the winter of 1890, tragedy fell upon the Hollow family. It began with Clara, the youngest child. She grew sick with fever, coughing through the nights, her small body wasting away despite the doctor's efforts. Samuel brought physicians from the city, even a spiritualist who claimed to banish sickness by prayer. But nothing worked. Clara died in her upstairs bedroom on a cold January morning, the snow piled high against the windows. Her funeral was held in the parlor of the house. Local townsfolk attended, but many whispered that they felt unwelcome, that the air inside the house seemed heavy, pressing against their chests. Eleanor, Clara's mother, never recovered. She withdrew from society, often seen wandering the halls at night, carrying her daughter's favorite doll. Servants reported hearing her speaking softly to someone, though when they looked, she was always alone. Then, only 6 months later, young Thomas fell ill as well. This time, Samuel tried everything: new doctors, expensive medicines, even sealing the boy's room against drafts. But nothing stopped the decline. Thomas died in the same room where his sister had passed. The Hollow family was broken. Samuel buried himself in work, leaving the house at dawn and returning after dark. Eleanor rarely left her room, and the servants began reporting more terrifying events. The haunting deepens. One maid swore she heard children's laughter echoing through the upstairs hallway late at night. Another said she found small handprints on the fogged glass of a bathroom mirror, though no children lived there anymore. Visitors noticed that the windows in the children's rooms always seemed to be open, no matter how many times they were closed. Cold drafts would sweep through the corridors, carrying with them a faint scent of earth, as though from freshly turned soil. One night, Samuel returned home later than usual. He found Eleanor sitting in the parlor, the fire unlit, the room cloaked in shadows. She was cradling something in her lap. When Samuel lit the lamp, he saw that it was Clara's doll. But what unsettled him most was Eleanor's expression. She was smiling faintly, her lips moving as though whispering to someone. When Samuel asked her who she was speaking to, she replied softly, "They're here. They've come back to me." The locked room. By 1893, Samuel Hollow himself began to change. He stopped going into town. The servants rarely saw him, and when they did, he appeared gaunt, his eyes sunken, his beard untrimmed. Eleanor grew more fragile by the day. She spent most of her time in the children's old rooms, sitting by the windows, watching the forest. Then one morning, a housemaid entered Thomas's room to clean and found Eleanor kneeling in the corner, her face pale, her hands clutching something small. When the maid looked closer, she saw Eleanor was holding a set of tiny teeth. Children's teeth. The maid fled the house that same day and never returned. Soon after, Samuel ordered the doors to both children's rooms sealed shut. He claimed it was to preserve their memory, but the servants whispered that it was because something darker lingered there. The house began to decay. Dust thickened in the corners. Curtains rotted on their rods. The servants who remained reported hearing the sound of children running down the hallways at night. One even claimed to see Samuel himself talking to shadows in the parlor, as though carrying on conversations with his dead children. The final winter in December of 1894, Samuel Hollow was found dead in his study. He had locked the door from the inside. When the door was forced open, they found him slumped over his desk, his pen still in his hand. The paper beneath him bore only a single line, scrawled again and again. "They are not gone." Eleanor was left alone in the vast, rotting manor. Neighbors saw her rarely, and when they did, she appeared more ghost than woman. In the spring, she vanished entirely. When authorities entered the house, they found the place in disarray. Furniture overturned, windows broken, and a trail of small footprints leading up the staircase into the sealed children's rooms. But when they forced the doors open, both rooms were empty. Eleanor Hollow was never found. Aftermath: the house was abandoned after that. No one wished to buy it, no matter how low the price dropped. Farmers refused to go near the property, claiming they saw lights moving in the windows at night. In the 1920s, a group of boys dared each other to enter the manor. They lasted less than an hour. When they stumbled out, pale and shaking, they refused to speak of what they had seen. One of them, years later, told his son that he had heard the laughter of children echoing through the halls, followed by the sound of something crawling across the ceiling above them. By the 1950s, the house was crumbling. Its roof sagged, its windows shattered. Still, people whispered about it. Some claimed to see a woman standing at the upstairs window, holding a doll in her arms. Others swore they saw two small figures peering out from behind the curtains. In 1974, a fire swept through the house. By the time it was extinguished, most of the structure had collapsed. But witnesses said that as the flames consumed the manor, they heard screams, not of people burning, but of children laughing. Even now, when the wind blows across the ruins of Holloway Manor, locals say you can hear faint whispers. Some swear they've seen candlelight glowing among the collapsed stones. Closing reflections, the story of Holloway Manor remains one of the most chilling, creepy old house stories true. It is a tale not just of tragedy, but of something that refused to die, even when the walls turned to ash and the family was long gone. Some say the Hollow children never left. Others believe it was Eleanor's grief that trapped them there, binding her and her children to the ruins of the manor for eternity. But perhaps the most unsettling thought is this: that the house itself absorbed the sorrow, the madness, and the death, and that even in ruin, it waits. So if you ever find yourself wandering the countryside of Pennsylvania, and you come across a crumbling foundation hidden in the trees, stop, listen. You may just hear the faint sound of children's laughter, carried on the wind. And when you do, remember the Hollow family and the house that refused to be forgotten. The Holloway House may have been forgotten, but it is not alone. There are other homes where sorrow grew roots, where grief became something far darker. Our next story takes us there, to the Whitlock Manor. Story 2. Creepy old house stories. True, the Ashwood House. Some houses are forgotten because time has swallowed them whole. And some are remembered because their stories cling to the people who dare to speak of them. Tonight, I will tell you the story of the Ashwood House. It is a tale that begins in the late 19th century and stretches all the way to the present, with whispers that continue to this day. Unlike many legends, this one is rooted in history, recorded in local archives, old newspapers, and the faded memories of those who lived nearby. It is one of those rare, creepy old house stories true that leaves its mark long after the house itself should have been forgotten. The arrival of the Ashwood family in 1891, Dr. Charles Ashwood, a respected physician, moved with his family into a large Victorian house on the outskirts of a small town in upstate New York. The house was striking, 3 stories of ornate woodwork, tall windows, and ivy creeping up its brick walls. It had been built decades earlier by a shipping merchant, but it had stood empty for years before the Ashwoods purchased it. Dr. Ashwood was known as a stern but caring man. His wife, Margaret, was gentle and soft-spoken, admired for her charity work. They had 3 daughters, Lillian, the eldest at 16, Mary, aged 12, and Alice, the youngest, only 6. At first, life seemed idyllic. The family was seen walking into town together on Sundays, the children laughing as they ran ahead, their mother smiling quietly behind them. The house, once dark and empty, seemed alive again with voices and light. But soon, shadows began to creep in. Whispers in the halls. It began with the children. Alice, the youngest, complained of hearing voices at night. She told her mother that someone came to her room after dark, whispering from the corner. When Margaret asked her who it was, Alice replied, "The children who live here." At first, the Ashwoods dismissed it as childish imagination. But when Mary, the middle daughter, began saying she too heard footsteps outside her room at night, Margaret grew uneasy. Then one evening, Lillian, the eldest, screamed in the middle of the night. When her parents rushed in, they found her standing by the window, pointing into the dark yard below. She swore she had seen a figure standing in the garden, a child staring up at her. When her father looked, the yard was empty. But in the morning, when he examined the soil beneath her window, he found small footprints pressed into the earth. The decline of Margaret Ashwood as weeks passed, Margaret herself began to change. She was often pale, distracted, and sleepless. Servants noticed her wandering the house at odd hours, sometimes standing in the darkened hallway outside the children's rooms, whispering to herself. She told her husband she felt that something in the house was watching them. Not just watching, but waiting. Dr. Ashwood, a man of science, dismissed these fears. But the servants began leaving one by one, frightened by what they claimed to hear. Weeping in the unused rooms. Children's laughter echoing through the halls. Doors opening on their own, then slamming shut with violent force. By the winter of 1892, only one maid remained, a woman named Ruth. She kept a private journal, which was later found among her belongings. In it she wrote, "There is something in this house. I hear it every night. The sound of children playing, though the Ashwood girls are asleep in their beds. I fear we are not alone here, and I do not think it means us well." Tragedy strikes. The true horror of Ashwood House began in February of that year. Little Alice, the youngest daughter, disappeared. She had been tucked into bed by her mother, her doll clutched in her arms. But when morning came, her bed was empty. The windows were locked, the doors bolted. Yet she was gone. The town searched for weeks, combing the woods, dredging the nearby river, questioning travelers who passed through. But no trace of Alice was ever found. The grief nearly destroyed Margaret. She refused to leave the house, convinced Alice was still inside, hidden somewhere in the walls. She claimed to hear her daughter's voice at night, calling softly, "Mama, come find me." Dr. Ashwood tried to remain rational. He hired men to search the house from attic to cellar. But nothing was found. No secret passageways, no hidden rooms. Still, the voices continued. The second disappearance in October of 1893, tragedy struck again. Mary, the middle daughter, vanished. This time she disappeared during the day. She had been playing in the yard while her mother hung laundry nearby. Margaret turned her back for only a moment, and when she looked again, Mary was gone. The entire town searched once more. The woods, the fields, even the abandoned wells. But Mary, like Alice, had vanished without a trace. The townsfolk began to whisper that the Ashwood house was cursed. Some claimed the land had once been a burial ground. Others insisted the merchant who built it had dabbled in dark practices. Dr. Ashwood, desperate and broken, began drinking heavily. He rarely left the house, and when he did, his once proud appearance was a shadow of what it had been. The last daughter, by 1895, only Lillian remained. She was 17 by then, pale and thin, her once bright eyes hollow with fear. She rarely left her room, keeping her lamp burning through the night. One evening Ruth, the last servant, woke to the sound of screams. She rushed to Lillian's room, but found the door locked from the inside. By the time Dr. Ashwood forced it open, the room was empty. Lillian was gone. Her lamp still burned, her bed was neatly made, her window was locked. But she too had vanished without a trace. Margaret collapsed into hysteria. She swore she heard all three of her daughters in the house calling to her. She spent her nights wandering the halls, whispering their names, sometimes laughing, sometimes sobbing. A few weeks later, she was found dead in the parlor. Her body lay curled on the floor, her hands clutching the doll that had once belonged to Alice. The fall of Dr. Ashwood. Dr. Charles Ashwood lived on in the house for another year. Neighbors rarely saw him, except when he staggered into town to buy whiskey. His practice collapsed, his reputation ruined. In the spring of 1896, he too was found dead in the house. He had hanged himself from the grand staircase. On the wall beside him, scratched into the wood with a knife, were the words, "They would not let go." The empty house for decades after the Ashwoods were gone, the house stood empty. No one would buy it. No one would live in it. But people kept telling stories. Children dared each other to run up to the porch at night. Some swore they saw faces staring from the windows, pale, wide-eyed children watching them. Others claimed they heard laughter drifting through the broken shutters. In 1938, a group of teenagers entered the house on Halloween. They lit candles and dared each other to explore the upper floors. When they reached the nursery, the room that had once belonged to Alice, they found something chilling. The words "Mama, come find me" had been carved into the wall over and over again. The boys fled in terror. The fire in 1952, Ashwood House burned. No one knew how the fire started. Some said it was lightning. Others believed it was vandals. But witnesses swore they heard something more than crackling flames. They claimed they heard screams, high-pitched, childlike laughter mixed with the roar of the fire. When the flames finally died, only the charred shell of the house remained. And yet the stories did not stop. The ruins even today, locals say the ruins of Ashwood House are not silent. Hikers who wander too close report hearing faint voices in the wind. Some say they have seen a small girl standing among the blackened stones, holding a doll in her arms, before vanishing into the air. And on certain nights, when the moon is high and the air is still, passers-by claim to hear the echo of laughter drifting from the ruins. The laughter of children who were never found. Closing reflections: the Ashwood family is gone. The house is gone. But the story remains, passed down through generations, told in whispers by those who remember. It is one of those hauntingly creepy old house stories, true, that refuses to die, because some tragedies leave an echo too powerful to fade. So if you ever find yourself walking in upstate New York, and you come across a crumbling foundation hidden deep in the woods, stop for a moment. Listen carefully. If you hear children laughing, turn back, because some houses, even in ruin, still remember, and some families never let go. And yet, as chilling as Whitlock Manor may be, there is another place, a house whose story has echoed for more than a century, a place that time and even fire could not silence. Our final story takes us to Massachusetts, to the ruins of Hawthorne Place. Story 3. Creepy old house stories. True, the Hawthorne Place. There are places where the past is not silent, where every shadow seems to lean closer, and every gust of wind carries voices that should have long since faded. One of those places is known as Hawthorne Place. It is not a story of folklore, not a ghost story told by children to frighten each other. It is one of those rare, creepy old house stories, true, remembered through records, whispered through families, and feared by locals who still will not walk its road after dark. Let me take you there. The house is built. Hawthorne Place was built in 1874, in the rolling countryside of Massachusetts. It was a grand, square house built of dark stone with tall chimneys and heavy oak doors. It stood at the end of a long gravel drive, its iron gates twisted with ivy. The builder was a man named Jonathan Hawthorne, a wealthy banker who wanted to establish his family name with a home that would last for generations. Jonathan moved into the house with his wife, Eliza, and their son, Edward, only 10 years old at the time. At first, the family thrived. Jonathan hosted parties in the grand dining room, where chandeliers blazed with candlelight and guests danced to the sound of violins. The house seemed alive with laughter, music, and wealth. But the good years did not last. The family's decline in 1879, Eliza Hawthorne fell ill. Her sickness came suddenly, violent coughing fits that left her pale and bedridden. Jonathan brought in doctors from Boston, sparing no expense. But nothing helped. Within months, Eliza was gone. Jonathan was devastated, but what unsettled the household most was young Edward. Servants reported that he refused to leave his mother's bedroom, even after her death. He told the maids that she was still there, sitting by the window waiting for him. When one of the housekeepers tried to remove him, he screamed that she was hurting his mother, pointing to the empty chair by the glass. After that, Edward grew strange. He spoke less and less to the living and spent his nights wandering the halls. The servants whispered that he was speaking to someone they could not see. The sealed room by 1883, Jonathan's fortunes began to decline. His banking ventures collapsed and debts mounted. Many of the servants left as the house fell into disrepair. One winter night, a terrible storm struck. The roof above the east wing collapsed, forcing Jonathan and his son to close off part of the house. It was around this time that Jonathan sealed one particular room on the second floor. No one knew why. The door was locked, the windows nailed shut. But the remaining servants said they often heard sounds from within, furniture scraping across the floor, faint weeping, and at times the unmistakable laughter of a woman. When asked about it, Jonathan became furious, insisting that no one speak of the room again. The madness of Edward. As Edward grew older, he became more withdrawn. At 16, he rarely left Hawthorne Place. His tutors complained that he was distracted, staring into empty corners, whispering to himself. One night, a tutor claimed Edward had drawn dozens of pictures of the same woman's face, the delicate features of his long-dead mother. By the time he reached 20, Edward was considered unstable. Jonathan, desperate to protect the family name, kept him hidden from public view. But townsfolk began to talk. Those who passed Hawthorne Place at night swore they saw lights moving in the sealed east wing. Some claimed they saw Edward at the window, standing beside a tall, shadowy woman. A woman who could not possibly be alive. Jonathan's end in 1891, Jonathan Hawthorne was found dead in his study. The cause was ruled a heart attack. But when the coroner arrived, he noted something unusual. Jonathan's expression was one of terror, his eyes wide open, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. The townsfolk whispered that he had seen something in his final moments, something no man should see. Edward, now 22, inherited the house. Alone and unstable, he locked the gates and dismissed the last of the servants. From that day on, no one saw Edward Hawthorne again in town. The empty years for decades, Hawthorne Place stood silent. Travelers along the country road swore they sometimes saw lights in its upper windows, though no one lived there. Children dared each other to run up to the gates, only to flee when they heard whispers in the wind. In 1923, a group of local men tried to enter the house. They found the front doors barred, but one window had been broken. When they climbed inside, they described the interior as frozen in time, dusty furniture, rotting curtains, and personal belongings left as if the family had only just stepped out. But in the parlor, they found something chilling. Dozens of sketches scattered across the floor. All of them were of the same woman, Eliza Hawthorne, the dead wife. and in the corner of the room sat a single chair. Its cushion was indented, as if someone still sat there. Though no one did. The men fled. The discovery of Edward in 1932, a real estate company attempted to purchase the property. When officials entered the house, they made a grim discovery. In the sealed upstairs room, the one Jonathan had locked decades earlier, they found the remains of Edward Hawthorne. He was seated in a chair, a candle melted beside him, his body long since decayed. But what unsettled investigators most was the position of his bones. His head was tilted upward, as though staring at someone standing in front of him. His hands were raised, palms open, as if in supplication or fear. On the wall above him were hundreds of scratches, words carved again and again into the plaster. They said, "She will not leave me." The house after Edward after that discovery, Hawthorne Place, was declared unfit for living. It was left to rot, its windows broken by storms, its gardens overtaken by weeds. But people never stopped speaking of it. Hikers who passed near the estate swore they saw a pale figure in the upstairs window, a woman with dark hair staring out. Others claimed to hear a man's voice shouting from within, though the house had been empty for years. In the 1950s, 2 boys vanished while exploring the grounds. Their bicycles were found leaning against the iron gates, but the boys themselves were never seen again. Search parties combed the area for weeks. They found no trace. Locals began to whisper that the house had taken them, just as it had taken Edward. The fire and the ruins in 1971, a fire swept through Hawthorne Place. Neighbors saw the flames rising in the night sky, but when firefighters arrived, they found the house strangely quiet. No animals fled the burning grounds. No birds circled above. The fire destroyed most of the structure, leaving only blackened walls and a crumbling foundation. And yet, survivors of the fire claimed to hear something impossible. The sound of laughter, soft feminine laughter, carried on the smoke. The present day, even in ruin, Hawthorne Place has not been forgotten. Urban explorers who venture near the site report hearing whispers, footsteps, and the sound of doors slamming shut in the windless air. Some say they've seen a woman standing among the ruins, her figure clear in the moonlight, before vanishing into nothing. Others claim to hear a man's voice pleading, echoing from the blackened stones, "She will not leave me." To this day, no one knows whether Edward truly saw his mother, or whether the house itself created something darker to keep him prisoner. Closing reflections. Hawthorne Place is gone now, consumed by time, reduced to ruins. But its story lingers. It remains one of the most chilling, creepy old house stories true ever told, a reminder that some houses are more than wood and stone. Some houses remember, some houses cling, and some houses never let go. So, if you ever find yourself walking through the forests of Massachusetts, and you stumble across a crumbling foundation swallowed by ivy, stop for a moment. Listen. If you hear a woman's laughter drifting through the trees, or a man's voice crying out in despair, you may have found the ruins of Hawthorne Place. And if you do, do not stay too long, because some houses, even in ruin, are still waiting. You have now heard 3 creepy old house stories true: the Holloway House, the Whitlock Manor, and the Hawthorne Place. 3 homes, 3 lives, 3 legacies of sorrow, and the haunting reminder that sometimes the past never leaves. Thank you for walking with me tonight through shadows and silence. If you wish to hear more true scary stories for sleep, remember to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, sleep well. And may the houses you pass in the dark remain only empty.